We are quickly approaching the 30th anniversary of the release of Pokémon Red and Green in Japan, the 27th of February. As with every year this decade, we're expecting that the 27th will see the airing of a new Pokémon Presents, and one which will reveal the upcoming Pokémon games set to release in the 30th anniversary year. Interestingly, these games will also be the 10th core series titles to release, and by that I mean a set of games that start a Pokémon generation, like Scarlet and Violet or Sword and Shield. In today's video, I'm going to try and get ahead of the curve and outline some predictions and hopes for these games, based purely on what we can gather from recent Game Freak projects, as well as my own imagination, and has no basis in any leaks that have come out, as I wish to stay blind to them myself. For that reason, I'd really appreciate it if you could keep the discussion of leaks for Gen 10 out of my comments section, as it would be a real shame for me to have to turn comments off, especially so early on into the reveal to release cycle. They've not even been revealed yet. But with all of that being said, let's get into it. To start with, we need to theorise on some of the core elements of this game. What will the main mechanics be? Where will the region be set? Any idea of themes? Well, to start, let's take a look at those core mechanics. Now, this might seem like a very easy thing to predict in some ways, but it's really not. Considering that in the last decade, we've seen Pokémon come a long way, from developing for the 3DS with Sun and Moon, to having a shaky start to home console development with Let's Go and Sword and Shield, and then starting to experiment further with games like Legends Arceus, Scarlet and Violet, and Legends EA. You kind of have to wonder what it's all leading up to, right? Sword and Shield introduced open zone gameplay with the Wild Area, Isle of Armor, and Crown Tundra, with Legends Arceus expanding on this by making the Hisui region all open zone, with 5 to explore. And then Scarlet and Violet took this even further by introducing the first ever open world Pokémon game. ZA would then continue this trend, with Lumiose being open from pretty much the starting point. I think in that regard it's safe to say that Gen 10 will have an open world. That in itself is not a massive leap of logic, as it follows the current developments of the Pokémon series, and will build nicely on from Scarlet and Violet and ZA. We'll give the open world its own section of the video, I'm sure, at some point, to discuss both my predictions for what we can expect, as well as what I actually want to see with it. There have also been some more fundamental developments in the series, with changes made primarily by the Pokémon Legends games. ZA completely changed the Pokémon battling system, with us now using real-time combat, as opposed to the turn-based combat that the series is known for. So, the big question is, will Gen 10 bring in this real-time combat? Or even the enhanced turn-based combat from Legends Arceus? Unfortunately, it is impossible to say for sure one way or the other. However, I do think that there's a pretty good chance that we go back to the turn-based combat until the next Pokémon Legends title, just because it's exactly what Scarlet and Violet did. However, Scarlet and Violet did heavily share their development with Legends Arceus, so the idea that not as much made it into them does make sense. However, ZA, while being developed at the same time as Gen 10, was seemingly complete, or near enough bounds, by late 2024 or early 2025. That gives Gen 10 the time to kind of implement some of the new real-time combat systems. Now obviously, if the basis of Gen 10 was made with the turn-based system in mind, it might not be as simple to introduce, just like swap it out for the real-time system, and of course they didn't know what the reaction to that was going to be until Legends EA released in October, so I'm not entirely hopeful about it, but I do kind of hope a little bit. And who's to say that they didn't actually develop it together, with ZA being the experimental phase, Mega Dimension expanding on it with multi-battles, and now it's time to use it in a full core title. And I know I do sound slightly insane saying this, but you have to bear one thing in mind. Pokémon Championships are moving away from the main series as of this year, instead moving to the upcoming Pokémon Champions. This has a massive impact on the discussion of whether Gen 10 will use real-time or turn-based combat. I feel like a lot of the time it feels as though Game Freak are reticent to update combat for core titles, primarily because of the fact that the competitive side of Pokémon is so big and brings in a lot of money, and you kind of need that core title to have that turn-based mechanics in order for people to continue doing things as they are, rather than getting people to transition to like the new ZA Battle Club style, which is incredibly fun, as I've played quite a bit of it myself, but I'm not sure that they would want to do that for the Pokemon World Championships. Is that the only reason that we've not already jumped the turn-based ship? Probably not. It's a series staple, and in some people's eyes, the whole why change what works question comes into play. Personally, I'm not entirely convinced it does work anymore. I enjoyed Scarlet and Violet a good amount, as I talk about in my full review of the games, but I did find myself not engaging with the battle content in the same way. I'm at a point now where it feels incredibly easy, but as my Pokemon were just simply fast enough, bulky enough, and strong enough that no trainer's Pokemon could leave much of any impact on my team. ZA really changed this for me, as while the game is still not particularly challenging outside of Mega Dimension's post-game bosses, the new combat style actually really enhanced the gameplay for me by making me stay fully focused and engaged, because a lot of the trainer's Pokemon, even just in the battle zones, can deal some devastating damage to my team. And while I've not lost a battle yet, it does sometimes feel quite intense. As far as hopes are concerned, I absolutely want Gen 10 to use the real-time combats mechanics introduced in Legends ZA. As for my actual prediction on this, it is a real 50-50. There's a lot of good reasons for them to stick to the turn-based combat that they've used for the last 30 years, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see that happen. But with the Pokemon Championships moving to a side game, the fact that this is the 10th generation of Pokemon, and that this will be most likely their first Switch 2 exclusive game, I do think there's a fair chance that they build on the real-time combat of Legends ZA. Another fundamental development that the series has been making since 2016 is the continued choice to replace features rather than add on to them. With X and Y introducing Mega Evolution in 2013, the feature returned in both Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and then in all of the Generation 7 titles, Pokemon Sun and Moon, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. But in June 2019, during the dreaded E3 Treehouse livestream, basically in the same breath as confirming that the Dex cut no less, Game Freak confirmed that the Mega Evolution would not be making a return in Sword and Shield, instead having Dynamax taking its place. Sword and Shield also introduced Gigantamax, which might as well have just been Mega Evolution crossed with Dynamax, so the removal seemed somewhat unnecessary. This trend actually continued in Legends Arceus, where the only gimmick that game has is the strong and agile style moves, which is sort of similar to Z moves, but nowhere near as over the top and a bit more dynamic. Then in Scarlet and Violet, this continued again, with Terra Style replacing all of the previous gimmicks, though there were references to Mega Evolution in Roaring Moon and Iron Valiant, with both of them taking inspiration from the Mega Evolutions of their contemporary counterparts. But in Pokemon Legends ZA, we saw the return of one of these previous features, that being Mega Evolution. And very interestingly, in Mega Dimension, we actually saw an expansion of this with the introduction of Z Mega Evolution. I've already talked about this briefly in the most recent episode of the Zero Chart, but I think it's very interesting to introduce a new additional feature to a gimmick and only have it be used for a tiny handful of Pokemon, currently only 2. To reiterate what I said in that previous video, do I think that Mega Evolution is a shoo-in to return in Gen 10? Absolutely not. I'd love it to, but I'm dead set on it not being something that Pokemon are planning, because they have spent so long getting away from Mega Evolution, and while they did bring it back for ZA, that was a return to Kalos, rather than, some new region with Mega Evolution. So let's talk about the gimmicks. What we could see in Gen 10, and whether any other gimmicks will make their return. Firstly, I'm not really sure what more you can do to make a generational gimmick at this point in the series. We've had Pokemon take on new forms. Twice. We've had upgrading moves to be more unique and powerful. Thrice. We've had changing a Pokemon's type, and you could argue that we've had that twice too, given that Mega Evolution does the same for some Pokemon, though not on the same level. So what, fundamentally, do you do to make something unique? Going back all the way to 2019, 7 years ago at this point, the rumour that existed alongside Sword and Shield before the June Direct was that Pokemon were going to be armoured in some way. Now my assumption here is that this would have acted like Dynamax, in that every Pokemon can undergo it, but it raises a Pokemon's defensive capabilities. This is good in some ways, but it doesn't feel like it has as wide of an application as the other gimmicks that we've seen in generations past. Now, I'm not suggesting that Game Freak would actually use this clearly fan-made idea, but it does highlight that there's not much you can do with gimmicks. Even back then, there's not much that people were thinking of, aside from just, if it's set in England, give them armour. And now I'm not quite sure why they decided with England, let's make them big, but hey, if it works, it works. And to be honest, there's not really much you can do with gimmicks as far as I can think of in this moment right now. I definitely think that it depends on if we have the real-time or turn-based combat. As with a real-time system, we'll likely see the return of the energy charging that we saw in Legends ZA for Mega Evolution. But in a turn-based game, you'd instead have the more usual once-per-battle system. It also has to be somewhat flashy. All of the gimmicks include some form of obvious change. Megas are different forms. Z-moves have long cutscenes. Dynamax increases the size of your Pokemon. Strong and Agile style moves have altered animations, and Terra style has the Terra Jewel. So no matter what you do, it has to be something with some visual flair. But what about older gimmicks? This is both the 30th anniversary of Pokemon and the start of the 10th generation, and Pokemon loves to capitalise on nostalgia. Could we see older gimmicks return in this game? Of course, that would be kind of a good solution for them. Instead of having to create new gimmicks, being able to focus on expanding the ones that we've had from the past would be a good kind of avoidance method. Mega Evolution can always be expanded with Z Mega Evolution, and I certainly wouldn't say no to adding even more new Mega Evolutions. Terra Style, while it probably can't be expanded too much, is a fantastic feature that could easily be brought forward into future titles, and I'm sure many of us would be happy to see it return. I know I certainly would. Z-moves could return. You can always introduce more unique Z-moves, though I feel like they have a less wide application than other gimmicks. And reintroducing them does potentially call into question whether you can even have such long animations, considering it was so widely criticised in Sun and Moon. And then there's Dynamax. It certainly could return, but it is quite cumbersome. Having these enormous Pokemon around affects major level and world design. You could repurpose Gigantamax designs as Mega Evolutions if you wanted them to return. I've already talked about that from a lore perspective. We can always see a Mega G form, which I've talked about back in the Rogue Mega Evolution video, ages and ages back now. But you also do have to contend with the lore. Mega Evolution was originally written to be exclusive to the Kalos region, but that was quickly overwritten in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, with it now being spread across the world. They did kind of half retcon that in Scarlet and Violet by saying it's a phenomenon that can be done in other regions, but everything else is suggesting it's still available across the world, including ZA. There is nothing in ZA that suggests that it's exclusive to Kalos or Hoenn or Alola or Kanto or anything like that. Terra Style is only possible because of Area 0 and Terrapagos' energy, and that is only found in the Paldea region, and for some reason Kitakami, thanks to the Crystal Pool, and Blueberry Academy has a Terrarium core which they created with the intention of allowing Terra Style to be possible there. Z-moves are only possible because of Necrozma's power, and Dynamax is only possible thanks to Eternatus and the Darkest Day, so lore-wise, it might not be as possible as originally thought. But you also have to bear in mind that Pokemon Champions is doing exactly this with the Omni Ring. Now, as I've talked about this before, Champions does not necessarily have to fit into the current lore of the series in the same way the main series title does. But there is a part of me that just wonders whether the Omni Ring from Champions will make an appearance in Gen 10. In the September episode of the Zero Chart, I actually explained that the Omni Ring has a design reminiscent of technology used by the Aether Foundation, with the white and gold aesthetic. Is it possible then that the Aether Foundation will return in Gen 10 and bring the Omni Ring with them? Theoretically, the answer to that would be yes. However, I'm not planning on getting my hopes up for this. It would be quite cumbersome and put a lot of pressure on Game Freak to try and bring back and incorporate all of these different mechanics into one game. Technically, it has been done before, thanks to Pokemon Masters, but the mechanics are all used differently there, and it's also just a very different game experience than a main series title. I'm not saying it wouldn't work, but I'm also not saying it's the right decision. In terms of my hopes, I'd personally bring back Mega Evolution for this title, as it received a great expansion in ZA, and I'd love to see that go further. Plus moves also help bring Pokemon that don't have a Mega Evolution up to par with Mega Pokemon, evening the playing field. I also wouldn't mind seeing Terra Star return, as I think that the mechanic is very interesting and unique and would go a long way to further the gameplay of Gen 10, especially if we're now in a real-time system, because it would be very interesting if all of a sudden your Pokemon just becomes a different type halfway through the opponent just charging up a move. Very interesting to kind of see how that would play off one another there. As for my expectations and predictions, I'd say that we should expect none of the mechanics introduced in the past will return, and that we should expect something new. Maybe Mega Evolution will return to expand on Z Mega Evolution, but aside from that, I expect they'll follow suit with every other recent title and focus on a new mechanic. I think that's another thing we actually kind of need to talk about. I've made a few references to the fact that this is the 30th anniversary of Pokémon and the 10th generation. Will Pokémon use this as an opportunity to do a retrospective look at the series, like we had in both Sun and Moon and the Ultra games, or will it be entirely separate, like Sword or Shield and Scarlet and Violet? By that I don't mean that there'll be no references to the past, but in both core series titles released on the Switch, no returning characters made any appearances. This is vastly different to the Alola titles, which had characters from throughout the series' history, with Red, Blue, Giovanni from Kanto, Wally, Annabelle and Archie and Maxie from Hoenn, Luca, Cynthia and Cyrus from Sinnoh, Grimsley, Korez and Ghetsis from Unova, and Dexio, Cena and Lysander from Kalos. Of course, Legends EA has not long given us a number of returning characters from the Kalos region, though not beyond, and whether that will translate into the core series title is another story. As there were no returning Unovan characters even in the Indigo Disc, despite the fact that we returned to that region. Instead, we actually had just the grandson and daughter of two of Unova's gym leaders. This discussion in itself will be a separate part of the video, as it will have a great impact on these games. But first, let's talk about some of the very basic elements that make up a Pokémon game. Starting off with the region. Pokémon's regional diversity is very interesting. There are currently 4 regions based on Japan, that being the first 4, as well as Kitakami. Then there's 2 based on the USA in Unova and Alola, which are based on New York and Hawaii respectively. Then Europe, which has 3 regions, with the Kalos region, which is based on France, the Galar region, which is based on my homeland of the UK, and the Paldea region based on Spain and Portugal. So where's next? Well, there are quite a few options. Of course, there are still the 3 continents that have no regions based on them in Africa, South America, and Oceania. Each of these territories have plenty of countries that would translate fantastically into a Pokémon region, but if I had to guess the most likely of these areas specifically, it would be Australia, as that's another very well-known country that would create a very different region than what we've experienced so far. That's not to say that you wouldn't have your usual environments, but there would be some differences and a different mix of environments as well. There's also the possibility that they choose to go back to a continent that they've already visited before. Asia has only had 1 country get any regions, that being Japan, and it has so far received 4. And I could also see them expanding that further. Maybe a region based on South Korea or India would be an interesting setting for the next games. Or what about North America? Sure, there are 2 regions based on the USA, but what about a region based on Canada? There's no reason not to, right? Or even another America-based region. The last time we visited the Pokémon USA was in Alola, and, well, aside from Blueberry Academy anyway, but so there's every possibility that they return to the US for another region 10 years later. And of course there's Europe as well. There are still plenty of countries that could be great Pokémon regions, like Italy, Greece, Germany, and so many more. However, I do actually think I have an idea of what the most likely option is. That being a return to Japan. It is the 10th core series game, and I do not think it would be too soon to see us return to a Japan region, but one that's a bit different. Of course, Hisui and Kitakami are still relatively fresh in the mind, and explore Japan's cultural history. But getting a region based on the Osaka area, a more modern and futuristic Japan, perhaps building on the themes that we saw in Lumiose in Legends EA, would not be a surprising region at all for me. I'm not suggesting that it will be all city-based or anything like that. It would still be a full region, just with more focus on futuristic technology and developments. I feel like this is actually a pretty likely scenario, as taking Pokemon back to its origin point for the 10th generation would make a ton of sense. And if they did it in ways that are different to other Japan-based regions, that would be fantastic as well. Okay, so we have our region. We can assume that from there we'll have 2 player characters, one male and the other female. But we're also going to need our 3 starter Pokemon. Now usually the starters draw inspiration from the culture of the area the region is based on, especially when you get to their final evolutions. But in their base forms they're very much just an elemental animal. I don't see any reason why that should change here. Starters don't really have to be based on Pokemon or animals that are common to that regional area in the real world. For example, I've never once encountered a monkey or a lizard here in the UK outside of zoos, and so I'm going to go with that, as we're not necessarily certain of the region's location. For the grass starter, I'm going to predict we'll see something a bit different, maybe a badger. A badger could present an interesting possibility as a grass-type Pokemon, and could be a cute starter. For the fire starter, I could see something like a bear, or something powerful, but with a cute factor as well. It could definitely have a lot of possibilities and would be a fun first partner. As for the water starter, they tend to be animals that live in or around water, and for this one I'm actually going with a crab. Not like the other crab Pokemon that we've already got, a bit cuter and less angry looking. Something someone would actually want to start their journey with. I'm obviously not set on any of these three, and they're pure speculation as of now, as there's literally no way for us to know what the starters will be like until that Pokemon presents later this month, assuming that we get one. I mean, let's face it, we are going to get one, because it's not only is it the 30th anniversary of Pokemon, but it's a Pokemon Day, and there's always something, and I think it's pretty safe to assume that we're going to get the reveal of Gen 10 at that presentation. So that's kind of your basic Pokemon game discussions had for now. The starters and the region and the mechanics, but now it's time for us to kind of look into what the initial reveal will look like, before we move on to some discussions about the wider game at large. So now let's talk reveal trailers. Pokemon has had some varying ones over the years. I'm specifically looking at the core game reveals, as oftentimes remakes, Legends games, and DLC packages are treated a bit differently, as they're not introducing new locations, or new Pokemon particularly, at least not to the same extent. So let's start by looking at the reveal of Pokemon X and Y, all the way back in 2013. In the initial trailer, they start by showing us shots of the Kalos region, followed by introducing us to all three starter Pokemon. We then see a bit more of Kalos before they reveal Xerneas and Yveltal in the game's titles. This is a pretty good announcement. You see a good chunk of the new region and some very interesting choices as well. From Ramos's gym to Morva's chamber to outside the Kalos power plant. It shows a real variety, which is a great strength of this trailer. Then there's Sun and Moon. We can only hope that they do not do what Sun and Moon did to us. No starters, no region, no concrete anything besides the titles. Just some shots of the Game Freak team working on concepts after a 2-minute long retrospective followed by the title reveal. Pokemon loves to do a bit of a retrospective. They often pad out Pokemon Directs and Pokemon Presents with them. The best one that they've done is in the 2019 Direct, where they just show shots of Pokemon games in the background while Ishihara talks to us. Within less than a minute, we get into the reveal of Sword and Shield. The 2021 Pokemon Presents, however, decided to give us a literal song and dance to open the presentation, lasting 5.5 minutes. And it literally was just showcasing everything Pokemon has done. And I don't get it. However, I am unfortunately thinking that we will see something similar this year, as it is another anniversary. Since the end of Pokemon Direct and the introduction of Pokemon Presents, we have seen a shift in the way that Pokemon presentations are done. Unlike the 2013 Pokemon Direct, which was solely to announce Pokemon X and Y, and the 2019 Pokemon Direct, which was purely to announce Pokemon Sword and Shield, Pokemon Presents reveal all of the updates for every mobile game and spin-off under the sun. Every single time, the majority of the presentation is taken up by updates to games that a tiny amount of the Pokemon player base actually cares about. And I'm including the ones I play, especially since Masters data mines often happen before these presentations, so those of us who actually play the game already know the information. Back on track slightly, the Sword and Shield reveal was done very well. We get a series of shots of the game, showcasing Turfield, Motostoke, Route 9 and Postwick. Then you have the reveal of the player characters, showing us a battle and then showing us a bit more of the region before giving us a separate CGI trailer in order to reveal the starter Pokemon. This takes a very similar approach to X and Y in some ways, showcasing the region primarily, but also introducing us to the next 3 Pokemon we'll be starting our journeys with. They end the reveal with a shot of the stadiums as well, which of course highlights one of the main features of the Gala games. It's a great introduction, and having Omori and Masuda give us more details afterwards was a great touch as well. The one thing it didn't include, that the Kalos reveal did, was the legendary Pokemon. These were instead left until the June Pokemon Direct in a CGI trailer of their own. As for the starter reveal being in a CGI trailer rather than the gameplay reveal of X and Y, I do actually quite like this, as it gives the starters a good chance to show off their unique personalities. Scorbunny is speedy and confident, Sobble is timid and kind, and Grookey is playful and cheery. This reveal works really well, and I'm very glad it was the way it was, rather than padding the direct with random retrospectives of products you can no longer buy. Then we jump to Scarlet and Violet and the era of the Pokémon Presents. Aside from a horrifyingly realistic CGI Pikachu, this presentation consists mostly of very simple reveals. Alolan Pokémon coming to go, Masters EX celebrating its 2.5 year anniversary. Good God, is it really? God, it was only 2.5 years back then, huh? I think we're on 6.5 years now. Is it 6.5 years this month? Blimey, that really puts things into perspective. Cafe Remix gets its gacha mode, which, you gotta love it. Unite continues to exist, and then you get the main series news, with BDSP getting an event for Shaman, and the reveal of Arceus' Daybreak update. Then you have the big Scarlet and Violet reveal. The trailer starts off as a live-action one, showing a security guard walking around a building before stumbling upon the Game Freak office, which has some strange kind of motion and light coming from inside. In the room is particularly interesting. It's stylized heavily with tons of little hints to the games, such as the Team Star logo, a sandwich, and the logos for Yuva and Naranja Academy. Then things start shaking, and the clock starts swirling back and forth, and then you have the gameplay reveal. Like with Sword and Shield and X and Y, you start with shots of the Paldean landscape, with you seeing areas like Alfornada, Casaroya Lake, Mesagoza, Los Platos, and of course Cabo Poco. The environments shown off weren't nearly as varied as the ones from X and Y or Sword and Shield's trailers. There's no Glaciado Mountain, Sokarat Path, the area near the Cuff Squad base, or anywhere, just anything near Zapapico or anything interesting. The gameplay ends on a shot of the Switch OLED inside the player's bedroom before cutting to the real Switch OLED inside the room with the security guard. We see a few more hints to the game before the starter Pokémon are revealed by their Sugimori art, and then the titles are revealed. I actually really like the cinematic approach that this reveal takes, with the build-up being really intriguing. I also found it quite funny that a lot of people who reacted to the trailer expecting it to be a new game reveal, and then thought it might be a trailer for a new live-action movie before the actual reveal. I think the marketing team put in a lot of good work to make that room full of tiny details, and references that we wouldn't possibly be able to guess until later down the line. However, there are some problems with this reveal. The gameplay itself doesn't get enough focus. You see very little, and what it does show us isn't really anything exciting. It's just another Pokémon game, to the utmost degree. And the starter reveal was sadly disappointing as well. Just using the beautiful Sugimori art, which is lovely, but it leaves out the personality that these Pokémon have in the Sword and Shield and X and Y trailers, which they were pretty good at conveying in those. So, taking from that, what can we expect for a Gen 10 reveal? Well, it's kind of hard to say. I'm pretty confident in saying that it won't get its own dedicated presentation like Sword and Shield or X and Y, as the Presents format seems to have taken the place of Pokémon Directs purely for the reason of shoving in adverts for every mobile game under the sun. And while that's nice in some ways, it's nice to see what each game is up to, I think it's definitely overdone here, and could stand to put a bit more focus on the main series games. Unlike with Sword and Shield's reveal, Scarlet and Violet ends the presentation with no further information from the development team. The same was true of both Legends Arceus and ZA. So what my hope for the Presents is that we can actually get through the mobile games and whatever retrospective the Pokemon Company have cooked up for this year within about kind of 10 minutes or maybe slightly more, and then show us Gen 10 with some information provided afterwards. I am expecting that we will have the teaser reveal like the other recent titles. As for what I expect will be in that initial trailer, I think the starter Pokemon reveal is a shoo-in. Since Sun and Moon, the starters have always been revealed with the game, with the exception of ZA. And obviously, Sun and Moon did it when they properly revealed the game in May. And that obviously also has the exception of ZA, which had their reveal in the first gameplay trailer, which I think that we can also expect here. If they haven't got any gameplay to show us yet, that is a concern. Legends Arceus trailer had some gameplay, and while it was still quite basic, it was an earlier build of the game from either late 2020. And Legends EA had no gameplay in its reveal, but it wouldn't be released for another year and a half at that point. All of the core game reveals, with the exception of Sun and Moon, have some level of gameplay in them. I think we can also safely bet that we'll see the region, at the very least, be able to take an educated guess as to where it's based on. We were able to guess Paldea's basis just from the trailer alone, but I am kind of hoping that they did what they did with Gala and give us the map for the new region in the initial trailer, as that'll keep me nice and busy throughout the inevitable 2 to 3 month period with no news. And also Lumio City did do this as well, basically giving us the entire game map to work with, which I made a lot of predictions about, a lot of which were right and others which were not quite so right. But anyway, in a perfect world, the Gen 10 reveal would have a trailer similar in its opening to the Skeleton Violet one, so that we could start guessing and theorising with all these little random elements that we're not going to know just yet. But then have a more focused and interesting gameplay reveal, like the Sword and Shield reveal, with hopefully some more details afterwards, either in another gameplay trailer like we saw with most of the Legend CA trailers, or provided by the development team afterwards. I would love it if they decided to reveal a major character, and maybe 1 or 2 other Pokemon, just because it would just add some meat to the bones. But I do recognise that is not very likely at all. Maybe we'll get the rival reveal, or maybe we'll get like the Professor or something. But again, I'm not expecting that until kind of June time. At the end of the day, the reveal just needs to sell us. Unfortunately, Pokemon is in a bit of a contentious situation right now. Both ZA and Mega Dimension have been very divisive, and for very different reasons. You have some people who swear by ZA but were disappointed in Mega Dimension, like myself. And you have others that believe that Mega Dimension was exactly what they were missing from ZA. And there are people who dislike both, and there are people who love both. And no matter what Pokemon does, there is going to be discourse. Because of course there is. This is a Pokemon game. They never go by without a controversy. Someone will complain about the graphics, rightly or wrongly. Another will complain that it's open world. Someone else will about the fact that it's simply not Pokemon Red and Blue. But if they can provide a trailer that makes the majority of Pokemon fans go, wow, I want that, not out of necessity or out of a general love of the series, but because of what they showed off themselves, that would be amazing. Not to draw comparisons, as this is a much bigger topic and situation, and one day that, who knows, I might even make a video about. But Game Freak have now shown us what they're capable of, thanks to the upcoming Beast of Reincarnation, or as we previously knew it, Project Bloom. Yes, most of the game is being done by outside studios, but the team behind it is still within Game Freak. If they can pull off a project that looks as amazing as that, even if it means outsourcing a lot of the game's development to another studio, then they should. But specifically on the topic of the reveal of Gen 10, people will compare this to Beast of Reincarnation, because most people don't understand how the Gear project works. I still don't fully understand it myself, but I am kind of trying to learn more about it. But at the end of the day, there will be comparisons drawn. Now, I'm not saying that I expect Gen 10 will be anything like Beast of Reincarnation, but I do think it should be something that is at least comparable on some level. It's quite strange to think that this reveal will most likely happen in just a few weeks' time. It's possibly been confirmed by the time that you're watching this, as last year Pokemon Masters actually leaked it by adding the 3000 gems present that they give out for Pokemon Presents and labelling it as such. And I think that we'd all be incredibly shocked if there's no presents on Pokemon Day, as there has been for the last 5 years, and usually new generations are revealed on the Pokemon Day of the year that they release, and have since Sun and Moon. I think we do also have to remind ourselves of the usual news cycle for Pokemon games as well. The most recent one was a bit of an outlier, with ZA being announced in 2024, then not getting any news until exactly a year later, then getting another trailer a month after that, one in July, and then a few mega reveals until release. Most games get announced at the Pokemon Day Presents, and then we have a few months where there's very little to no news, usually until about June or July. From there, we usually get trailers about once a month, though that's not any guarantee, and then a release in mid-November. I predict that, based on previous core series titles, that this will be the 19th of November for this year. I expect that the same pattern will follow this year, with the usual second trailer in June, and one more for a Pokemon Presents in July or August. Maybe one for either a summer or September Nintendo Direct, and then release, as we ready ourselves for all of this to start again next year with the inevitable Gen 10 DLC. Putting it like that really does put the year into perspective for me. It's actually a really big year for me, as I'm finishing up my degree, so it's going to be quite something doing all of that, speculation and excitement for Pokemon while finishing a degree. Now let's move on to talking about the game in a broader context, specifically looking at the nostalgia angle and what, if any, callbacks to the past that we can expect. Pokémon truly celebrated their 20th anniversary in 2016, with tons of events and excitements, a worldwide phenomenon in Pokémon Go, and a magical air to all of it. But it all ultimately culminated in Pokémon Sun and Moon, the latest releases from the main series Pokémon games in the November of that year. As I talked about before, the games had quite a lot of callbacks to the past, including having trainers from the previous games appear in the title. There are also lots of other callbacks, such as having your player be from the Kanto region originally, references to locations like the Canalave Library, and events from previous games like the climax of X and Y. And there's also the introduction of regional Pokémon, taking a lot of classic Pokémon and refreshing them with a new twist. Since then, Sword and Shield decided to go down the completely standalone route, with very few references to the past, and not even a Looker appearance for the first time since its introduction in Platinum. While Galar has been referenced since in Legends Arceus Scarlet and Violet and Legends EA, it still feels quite separate from the rest of the series, because of a lack of references to the past. Scarlet and Violet tried a more halfway approach, as while they didn't introduce any returning characters, they did have a ton of references to the past, with things like Sonia's book in the Academy entrance hall, pictures of Hisui in one of the classrooms, both Salvatore and Rhyhorn having designs that incorporate previous Pokemon into their clothing, and accessories like regional forms and legendary Pokemon, and having Mega Evolution referenced in Roaring Moon and Iron Valiant. Then the DLC built on this by having Johto music used in the photo mode, having Blueberry Academy be in Unova, and it has many references in itself, like Drayton and Lacey being related to Unova's gym leaders, the wild Pokemon trainer themes there are based on the Unova's version of those themes, and Chargestone Cavern being basically Chargestone Cave, and the Elite Club rooms having references to Pokestar Studios, etc. While this wasn't as explicit as having Sharon show up to teach at Blueberry Academy, or having you take the Plasma Frigate from Paldea to the Academy with Korez in tow, it was still a nice way to reference the past. And actually, the design of the uniform at Blueberry Academy is actually seemingly either inspired or just similar to Charon's outfit in Black and White 2, where he's now also the leader of an academy, and also the gym leader in Aspertia City. However, with Gen 10, I'm certainly hoping for a bigger return to referencing the series' long history. With Legends EA being on a whole other level of referencing the past, with everything from confirming AZ was in Galar for the Darkest Day, to having a few cast members from the Kalos region actually returning in Karina, Mabel, Emma, and AZ, and of course Lysander as well, I feel like there is every chance that Gen 10 follows suit with this and brings in even more callbacks and connections to the past. My secret wish for Gen 10 is to have the Pokemon World Tournament return. I feel like it would be a really fantastic way to celebrate 30 years of Pokemon, and bringing back all of these trainers could be a very fun experience. Now personally, I'd do it in a way that's more similar to Galar's kind of championship tournaments, but with the difficulty of the post-Mega Dimension reward matches in the ZA Royale, where everyone uses more powerful teams. I'd also like to see some of the tournament expand somewhat. In Black and White 2, it was only gym leaders and champions who'd return, but allowing Rivals, Elite Four members and Frontier Brains to join in would only boost the experience. Imagine a situation where you could fight Rika, Bryson and Dirac all in one tournament. It'd be great fun. I do recognise just how much work that this would be for them to put in, but I believe that with the length of time that the game has been in development, it could be a possibility. I actually touched on this in my video from years ago about a similar idea during the release of the Crown Tundra, but a lot of these characters already have 3D models thanks to Pokemon Masters. Yes, you'd need to change them and update them quite a bit, but the baseline work is done. Maybe, I don't know if they'd actually be able to use those or not. I don't actually operate in 3D space. It might just be easier to make them from scratch. But it would be cool if these characters were given, if they were included at all. And if they were, maybe give them side quests outside of the tournament to spend a bit more time with the player and kind of get to know these characters even better. Small things like helping Morty find a ghost-type Pokemon that's been terrorizing the locals, helping Crash Awake meet the Masked Royale and seeing them battle it out, helping Lucian find a specific book in a local library, and the like, ways of allowing players to learn more about these characters' personalities in a fun and natural way, almost as if a part of Pokemon Master's spirit was in this game. I can really picture it now, a really strong way to build on these characters from the series past. Realistically, however, I sadly don't think this is going to happen. At least not in the base game. I could see it being like a DLC edition, but I think that we might be getting a few returning characters, the old favourites, like in Sun and Moon, but definitely not on the scale of Black and White 2, much as I might want that. If we do see returning characters, I think it's very possible that Cynthia, Red, Blue, and Looker will all return as they appeared in Sun and Moon. I could also see Grimsley, Colress, and Annabelle returning as well. I'd also like to see some other faces come back that haven't been as prevalent. I've already mentioned Morty, but he's a pretty popular gym leader, and given that Johto had literally zero representation in Sun and Moon, it would be a great time to bring him back as well. Of course, the characters from Alola, Galar, Paldea, and Lumio City could also return. I could see Iono being brought back, giving her like a surge in popularity. Maybe Leon could appear as Galar's representation. Most likely they'd be left to cameo appearances like some of the characters in Sun and Moon, but possibly even just being in battle areas. I mean, Leon's been referenced at this point in... I think he got a reference in Scarlet and Violet, but he definitely got a reference in Legend ZA. Where Jacinth actually mentions that he's been visiting the the Kalos region, so there's every chance that he could visit whatever new region we're in as well, especially now that he's no longer the actual champion of the Galar region. Scarlet and Violet didn't have any battle areas like the Battle Tree or Pokemon World Tournament, and I'm not sure if they'll bring any back considering the move of the championship level events to champions. But they could definitely do tournaments like in Galar, or possibly even just title defense battles like in Alola. But better if it's tournaments, realistically. Something, or maybe even a combination of the two. Who knows? Like in Galar, featuring a few old characters. In Sun and Moon, only Dexio, Cena, Looker, Annabelle, Colress, and Grimsley appeared outside of the battle tree, and only those characters, as well as Red and Blue, got new designs in those games. And sadly, we still don't even have Sugimori art for most of these aside from Red and Blue. I think that the way that Legend ZA handled referencing the past was done very well. There are small nods to other regions almost constantly, with a note from AZ mentioning the Darkest Day, Emma mentioning Primal Reversion could have been the origin of Mega Evolution, L compares Mega Zygarde's moves, specifically Nia Light, to Z moves, and references to Iono in Paldea and the Kimono Girls in Johto. It's full of them. I am really hoping that this trend continues in Gen 10. It's such a fun way to kind of reference the past, and just getting a character mention, just someone or somewhere that we know from the past, and it's just a really nice and fulfilling experience and makes this world feel connected. And I don't see any reason why you wouldn't continue that further, especially in the game releasing during Pokemon's 30th anniversary. On a more selfish note, it's actually quite useful for my Zero Chart series, as it can often lead to proving or, getting me to look into new connections for that series, just to kind of work out the lore a bit better and easier. So, such as the kind of references to Z-moves by L, reinforcing the ideas that I put out there in this September episode. But now we should possibly discuss the weight of the past references. Unfortunately, to many of our collective irritations, Pokémon has a habit of over-referencing one particular set of games and leaving the rest with very little, that being the Kanto titles. In Sun and Moon, all of the regional Pokémon were from Kanto. There were all sorts of quick references to the region as well. It's where your player character was from, etc. And then in Sword and Shield, all Gigantamax Pokémon were either from Galar or Kanto, with the exception of Garbodor, for some reason. Poor Garbodor being the only Univern Pokemon to receive a Gigantamax form. Charizard was Leon's signature Pokemon for some reason. Some of the Galar gym leaders had Kanto Pokemon as their Gigantamax Pokemon, Alice's Gengar, Bees Machamp, and Melanie's Lapras. And then in Scarlet and Violet, you actually had a first look into a game that didn't reference Red and Blue so heavily. There were still references from time to time, but it's not like all of the Paradox Pokemon were based on Kanto Pokemon or anything like that. Although both sets of ecologically similar Pokemon are based on Kanto Pokemon, however, Pokemon just often uses the excuse of it being a certain anniversary of Red and Blue to just really justify all these references. Pokemon Go launched with only Kanto Pokemon. Pokopia seems to be disproportionately Kanto focused. I mean, I'm only saying that based on the key art that has been released. We technically do not know how many Pokemon are going to be in at launch, or just in general, or and what distribution that's going to be. And all of the merch revealed this year so far seems to be Kanto themed, with the Lego sets and the gaming chairs, and we will no doubt have our fair share of Kanto references in Gen 10. Even Legend ZA isn't immune, making Grisham's ace Pokémon Charizard. Again! However, I am slightly more hopeful because of the much more shared out references that ZA has given us. If anything, ZAs are disproportionate for the games since X and Y's release, which is no bad thing if you ask me. I want it to be somewhat equal, and I'd love to see some references to how the reconstruction of Prison Tower is going, and how Blueberry Academy is doing. We can also safely say that Gen 10 will probably provide us with more regional Pokemon, ecologically similar Pokemon, and maybe something else as well. I'm hoping to see some more recent regional Pokemon in here, as there's no real reason why Pokemon introduced in Paldea couldn't have a regional variation in the new game, really. The closest we've had is Decidueye getting a Hisuian form in Legends Arceus, and of course that was just the generation afterwards, so it is very much possible. I think we'll probably see more in the way of ecologically similar Pokemon than regional forms, as those are newer and you can potentially do more with them to differentiate them from the original Pokemon. Like having Toadscool be based on a mushroom rather than a jellyfish, and Wugtrio being based on kind of a garden eel rather than a mole, I think? Actually, what is Diglett based on? God knows. But now I'd like to talk about the games as a whole, and looking into what we can expect from a visual and design standpoint. A couple of years ago, a screenshot of a concept build for Scarlet and Violet was shown to the public, shown off at the Computer Entertainment Developers Conference in 2023. I've put this screenshot in here just because it really looks interesting to me. It shows that Scarlet and Violet were originally supposed to be a lot more graphically interesting, and not just in a pure graphical power perspective, but also with their level design and their kind of world and environment design as well. You have these tall cliffs and a beautiful grassland to explore with vibrant colours, interesting rocks, and much more varied environment. It's really pretty and a far cry from what we actually got in Scarlet and Violet. It really helps that the scale feels so much grander because the camera is closer to the player here. You can see a Snorlax just lying down for a nap in the forest, and it looks just so natural. I do not know whether they built this like in an engine or for a game, or if this is literally just a conceptual mock-up created in Photoshop or something. If it's the former, then we are almost certainly in for a treat, as I'm not going to sit here and say that Scarlet and Violet pushed the power of the Switch. I don't personally believe that it did, but it did. But it ran terribly and looked really bad. With the added development power of the Switch 2, there is a very strong chance in my mind that Game Freak would be able to pull off something like this and utilise that power in order to bring back this kind of version. Even if it's just a mock-up, it is incredibly clear that this is what Game Freak envisioned for Scarlet and Violet, and it really does make sense. I mean, they clearly felt confident enough to showcase this, that they feel like, you know, they knew showing that off that people were going to be like, Scarlet and Violet should have looked like this. And so I feel like they now kind of will try and aim for that and strive for that for Gen 10, hopefully. I fully believe that they could achieve something like this for Gen 10. Not to bring it back to the comparison I made earlier, but with Beast of Reincarnation looking as good as it does, clearly Game Freak's team work very strongly with outsourcing developers as well. If they can't achieve this on their own, then reaching out to those support studios, including ones, that they share an office building with, like, Monolith Soft, for example, could really bring Gen 10 into something as beautiful as this. I look at this screenshot and I think that this is exactly what I want a Pokemon game to look like. I have legitimately lost sleep over this screenshot in the past, because it's just that gorgeous, and yet that far off from what Scarlet and Violet actually was. Okay, I am absolutely going off on this screenshot, and frankly, that is very much deserved, and I could fill an entire video talking about this, and I probably will do a video on the kind of Scarlet and Violet reveal to release, like, the pipeline, and all the betas and things, because watching footage of the leaked betas while I was making this video, while I was writing those last two paragraphs, made me see multiple other things that I really want to talk about, because I just do not understand why they removed them from the final build. Anyway, let's go back to the design stuff. Okay, so we don't actually know for sure if Gen 10 will be a Switch 2 exclusive. Legends EA was a cross-gen game with a heavily overpriced Switch 2 edition, in my opinion. To be clear, the Switch 2 edition in ZA provides the same upgrades that the free update for Scarlet and Violet did, and when the Animal Crossing upgrade costs less than £5, there is no way in hell that I should need to fork out £9 for less. There's not even like mouse controls in the menus or anything like that. But I digress. Anyway, I think it'd just be supremely stupid of Nintendo as a company to allow the next Pokémon games to be cross-gen. Switch 2 hit the ground running, but that has slowed to almost a halt just 6 months later, due to the cost of living crisis for the most part, but also because so much of Nintendo's output recently has been cross-gen, with both ZA and Metroid Prime 4 releasing on both. At the moment, you've only got Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, and Kirby Air Riders as true Switch 2 exclusives. Don't get me wrong, those games and series are popular. Mario Kart is probably Nintendo's most popular series based on numbers alone, and while Donkey Kong hasn't traditionally been that popular, the incredible experience of Bonanza has drawn many people to that game who wouldn't have been otherwise, including me, as well I haven't actually got the game yet. I did play the first area on GameShare with my brother over the summer, and would like to get it in the future. Hyrule Warriors, while a great expansion on the Tears of the Kingdom story, is not as popular of a series, and I think it's fair to say that people are starting to kind of tire of the era of the Wilds kind of Zelda games. As much as I love them, and I will always love them, and I loved Age of Imprisonment, it was just an incredible experience, I recognise that a lot of people, including myself to an extent, are kind of ready for Zelda to take a big step in a different direction. Then you've got Kirby, which again, that game specifically is only really popular with a certain crowd. The Kirby fanbase and, of course, people who enjoy Sakurai's games enough, neither of which apply to me personally, and I know I'm far from the only one. And it's clearly not boosted sales figures particularly, considering the Switch 2 has not done as well as it could have done over the holiday. But you know what is a system seller? What series that kids and adults love, and even if they don't love, they will play for the sake of it? Pokémon. Scarlet and Violet have sold over 27 million copies, and Sword and Shield aren't far behind. And don't forget that these games have had a massive controversies around them. As far as Nintendo are concerned, they want Pokémon developing exclusives for the Switch 2 as soon as possible, because it will drive sales like nothing else. That was the whole reason that in the summer of 2017 E3 presentation, they had Ishihara come in and say, Pokémon is coming to Nintendo Switch next year. That's why ZA has a Switch 2 edition. At the end of the day, Pokémon sells like no one's business. I'm almost certain that that's part of why Pokopia is a Switch 2 exclusive, as we're yet to actually see anything that makes me think it couldn't run on the original Switch. So what does that mean for the actual look and feel of the game? If it's exclusive to Switch 2, does that automatically mean it's going to look amazing? Well, no, it's not as simple as that. It should, hopefully, release without any major performance issues, especially as Scarlet and Violet and Legends EA run very well on the Switch 2 hardware, but what it does allow for is Game Freak to be able to better fulfill their vision. The games will be able to pull off a better lighting system than was previously possible, thanks to the improved hardware, and a more varied environment should also be possible too, even with Game Freak's known struggles in these areas. Again, it's not just about the hardware, as the game dev team's work plays a massive factor in as well. And they need to make sure that they are using the hardware the best that they can. But as for the design itself, I keep coming back to that screenshot that we looked at earlier. It's everything I want this game to look like. That sense of scale is a really important part of it, because Scarlet and Violet really lacked that, and that played into my perception of the world feeling really small and cramped. You could argue that Lumiose City has a better sense of scale and still feels small and cramped, but that would be because Lumiose is small and cramped. Though I do agree that the scale in that game is actually a lot better now. I think having more vibrant and varied environments would go a long way to improve the feel of the games as well, and having the level design be more interesting rather than large grasslands with nothing but a few trees in them, and these mountains which give you very little reason to scale them, would go a long way to boost the player's immersion. Having Pokémon blend naturally into the environment is also key. In Scarlet and Violet, the characters and Pokémon feel like they were just kind of slapped into Paldea in many ways. Despite the fidelity of the Pokémon, they don't blend. and the Pokémon don't really feel like actual living creatures either. The Legends games are better at this, yes, but I don't think anything quite reaches the possibilities that are set up by that one concept screenshot, with the Snorlax just kind of chilling out in the forest, which is done so well that it's possible to not even notice it. I didn't notice that Snorlax until I was actually doing this video, making this video, even though I've been looking at this screenshot for the last 2 years. I think having a more vibrant and dense world would benefit the games as well. Now I recognise that Scarlet and Violet couldn't do this due to the already prominent issues with performance that those games had, but the way that the landscapes are designed in that game are very sparse, with areas like Sokaret Trail and North Province Area 2, which are conceptually interesting and unique environments. They end up feeling quite dull and monotonous because they just don't fully realise their potential. It really does feel odd saying this, especially since Sword and Shield and Legends Arceus didn't have these issues and still ran fine. Obviously they're different cases, as Scarlet and Violet is fully open world, but they really shouldn't have had this many issues. And I'm seriously hoping for Gen 10 to fix this. So what else can we expect from the design of Gen 10? Well, it's hard to kind of say at this point, as the region will, obviously, inform that quite heavily. But if I had to guess, they'll most likely iterate on the Scarlet and Violet art style as opposed to the Legends Arceus or Legends EA one, as that art style was technically more advanced, and while the execution of it ended up worse, I actually really like the textures on characters and Pokemon, which are far more subtle in both Legends titles. I'm also hoping for the world textures to feel like they weren't just slapped on at the last minute, and feel kind of natural at least. I think you have to remember that the visual design is actually the key to a player's immersion. If they encounter anything that looks lazy and like it doesn't fit in the context of the world, that will dampen their experience. Even now, I think back to that one watchtower in Scarlet and Violet that is noticeably not on the ground, which could so easily have been fixed by moving it down a few Y coordinates. And believe me, I know how hard it is to get this stuff right. I have studied level environment design, but this is Pokémon, one of the biggest game franchises ever. Things like this should matter, and should be noticed and fixed quickly. As for Pokémon and character designs, these will probably follow suit from Scarlet and Violet as well. The designs for characters and Pokemon in Legends EA follow a similar style, so seeing a development of that for later down the line would not be too surprising at all. The recent characters have been nice and expressive and have had some great and unique designs, and I really like a lot of the recent Pokemon designs that we've had, so I really don't mind this at all. I'm secretly hoping for more than 100 Pokemon, but I am kind of expecting that we'll only have around 80 to 90, depending on how many regional or alternative forms of Pokemon we get in the game. But now, let's talk about some of the features that I'd like to see in Gen 10. We've already covered the idea of the return of the Pokémon World Tournament, which is, of course, a massive feature that I'd like to see return. But there are a few others I'd like to see make a comeback, some new ones that I'd like to pitch, and a few that previously appeared that could be developed further. Firstly, there's the traversal features. I made it known in my Scarlet and Violet review that I really wasn't a fan of Koraidon and Miraidon. The bike function should be an optional choice to get through areas more quickly, if you want to. It should not be a forced mechanic that you're basically pushed into using as much as possible in the game. I feel the ride Pokemon mechanics in the Alola and Hisui games are a great way to incorporate these. I've made suggestions before in my open world discussion video about how I'd do ride Pokemon, and I still stand by that now, but I doubt that that's how the game would handle them. Instead, I could see a series of boss Pokemon like Titans, but once you defeat them, you can use them as ride Pokemon. It would be a more natural way of unlocking further traversal options through the main story, and while it still wouldn't really be what I'd do, as I feel like you should be able to explore pretty much anywhere from the offset, I think that is the most likely approach. Ideally, if they were to incorporate level scaling, which we will be talking about in just a minute, this wouldn't be such a big deal, as players could actually go and find the different traversal Pokemon first and take them on before basically doing anything else with the story, if you wanted to, if you're like me, you know. I also hope that whatever Pokemon they use for this are both newly introduced Pokemon and are not too cumbersome. Koraidon and Miraidon felt so big and took up so much of the screen that there were times that it really felt like they were more of an irritation than a useful traversal mode. Next, let's talk Pokemon battles and catching. My ultimate hope for this game is that it sticks with the Legends Arceus and ZA method of throwing Pokeballs at wild Pokemon outside of battle. with the option to engage them in battle by throwing out your Pokémon. Given that the mechanic has been in both a turn-based and a real-time game, there is no reason why it couldn't work with either system. This would also remove the incredibly annoying and unnecessary system that both Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet had, which is basically if you touch a Pokémon, you are forced into battle. That system felt incredibly sluggish in Scarlet and Violet, and there were times where I was caught in like a near-infinite loop of battles, because Pokémon just track you down and try to engage you in battle all of the time. If the real-time system were to feature in this game, then there's no way that they don't include this. But if it's back to turn-based, it could go either way. Then there's level scaling. A divisive discussion, I know, but one that I feel is important. I am hoping that Game Freak has taken time to reflect on what they did, and what didn't work about the open world of Scarlet and Violet. And I'm hoping that they realise that claiming you can chart your own course through Paldea, but still having gyms, titans and Team Star bosses locked to certain levels, is not a good move. An open world game is a great idea, but for it to actually be open, you have to let players explore in a non-linear fashion. Of course, I've got a whole video about this on the channel, but I think it's really important that Gen 10 gets this right. Pokémon have had the time to learn from Paldea and create a much better player experience. I expect that at the very least, gyms and other main story events will have some level of scaling, whether it be to your party's Pokémon levels or just to the amount of gym badges you obtained. I am also hoping for the return of boss Pokémon, and hopefully with a challenge level on a similar part to Rogue Mega Pokémon in ZA. Boss Pokémon are often really fun challenges in games, and they can be as intense as trainer battles too. Scarlet and Violet really gave a focus to boss Pokémon with the Titans and Starmobiles, with the final battles of both the main game and both parts of the DLC being boss Pokémon. In terms of their difficulty, I feel that Rogue Mega Pokémon struck a very good balance. While there were some that I struggled with, I eventually learned from my mistakes and was able to defeat them. And I think that having a difficulty like that, where it doesn't particularly feel unfair, would be a great move for Gen 10. Again, we're back to that discussion of if the game will be turn-based or real-time, as that will impact this, given it's much easier to make a real-time battle challenging than a turn-based one. It would definitely be fun to see that back though. One way you could include boss Pokemon is to have a trainer's ace Pokemon take on a boss approach, similarly to what Team Star did. You kind of already start to see that with Mega Pokemon or Gigantamax Pokemon, because it kind of gives them their extra form and things, and that's cool in some ways, but I think they could be even more difficult than that, because in Scarlet and Violet, giving the Mega Evolutions didn't really... not Scarlet and Violet, in ZA, giving the Mega Evolutions didn't really change the difficulty of those particular battles, in my opinion, and from my experience. If you did have kind of boss Pokemon for each of the gym leaders, where the Pokemon is a lot tougher and more powerful, maybe just like an alpha Pokemon or something like that, that would be incredible, and could be a really fun way to make gym battles more interesting. Now let's talk about trainer battles. Scarlet and Violet did something very different with trainer battles, in that you have to go and talk to someone to initiate one. This was an interesting change, in that it kind of made all trainer battles optional. To me, this really made the game feel even more sparse. Yes, the option to battle is there, but it's not like I have to take it. I can just power on to the next gym or Titan or Team Star base. I think that while it was an interesting experiment, we should go back to the previous system of being spotted initiating a battle. ZA did this with a really interesting way, where if you were spotted by a trainer, a battle would begin, but you also had the chance to get the upper hand by attacking their Pokemon first. This, I feel, was a really great way to make Pokemon battles more invigorating. Now, I'm not suggesting that obviously they lift this exact system into Gen 10. Actually, there's something far more of an interesting way that they could do this. In the 2021 beta for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the original plan for trainer battles was for trainers to spot you, fill up a meter while you were in view, and then challenge you, a bit like being spotted by an enemy in the recent Zelda games. This is a genius move, and I cannot fathom why they removed it for the final game, but I think its application here would be perfect. If we are back in a real-time setting as well, having trainers keep their first Pokemon out of their Pokeballs for a surprise attack like in ZA would be a fun twist as well. I think the biggest non-gameplay loop related feature that I want to see come over from the Legends games is having a missions menu, which can keep track of side quests. Hopefully this will also prompt us to get more in-depth side quests like in both Arceus and ZA, as those have been a lot of fun. The gameplay loop itself will actually be quite interesting to see. As usual, it will consist of catching Pokemon, battling trainers, exploring the region, collecting gym badges or an equivalent item to take on the Pokemon League, while uncovering some mystery and stopping it from unfolding and endangering the people and Pokemon around. But there might also be some interesting differences from the gameplay that we've come to know over the last 30 years. Implementing the changes that we've talked about in this section would make the usual Pokemon gameplay loop far more engaging. I feel like ZA was really good in many regards with this. But trainer battles and wild Pokemon battles are completely separate, relegated to small enclosed areas for you to either battle trainers or catch Pokemon in. Another feature I'd love to see would be Pokemon acting a bit more realistically. I kind of touched on this briefly earlier, but Pokemon should react to their environment, what's going on around them, and the player's actions. It comes back to what I was talking about earlier with Pokemon integrating naturally, but I'd really love to see Pokemon do something interesting where a wild Pokemon can actually react to different things, and not just in a stock way, but with unique interactions. For example, a Snorlax wakes up and so finds a nearby berry tree to shake and a few berries fall out. You can sneak around and collect the berries, or you can let Snorlax eat them and go back to sleep. But beware, if you try and collect the berries, Snorlax might get pretty upset with you, and so challenge you to a battle. Things like this would really help boost the immersion within the game, and make it feel lived in and real, not just the backdrop for 3D models to appear in. I'd also like to see the return of mass outbreaks. These first featured in Legends Arceus, but made their return in Scarlet and Violet. They were great for shiny hunting and just for catching lots of a certain species of Pokemon. I really hope that they do come back in Gen 10, as I missed them more than I thought I would in ZA. The final major feature that I've kind of got in mind for now would be the return of Alpha Pokemon. While I'm not that fussed about using Alphas on my team, I think they make for some really fun and interesting kind of challenging mini-boss battles that, if integrated correctly, could make this game even more fun and immersive. I think a lot of my hopes for this game are built on kind of what I've seen from the ideas that the teams creating these games have shared of what they want to do, or from fan concepts that I really resonate with. The BDSP concept art shows a look into a world where the Sinnoh remakes are the ultimate Pokemon game. And similarly, a fan's work in creating a conceptual Sinnoh reimagining is really interesting to me, and feels like something we could definitely strive to have in the series itself. But now I'm going to move on and talk about the story and progression of the story and presentation of these games. It is impossible to even begin to guess at what the main story for Gen 10 will be. I'm not even going to try, but I am going to talk about the context of the story and how it's presented, as well as the other elements of this game's presentation like the UI and sound design. So let's start with that story. Pokemon has taken a couple of different approaches to story over the years. Of course, you have some common elements like travelling around a region, collecting items like gym badges, fighting an evil team, and saving the world, but each one has different unique elements, such as Sun and Moon introducing a twist villain in Luzamine, with Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet and Legends Arceus all following suit. Sun and Moon also tried having you collect Z crystals as opposed to gym badges, which was a really interesting new choice. Scarlet and Violet experimented with a very different presentation of story. The story is non-linear, a first for the series, and one that was relatively divisive. Unlike most Pokemon game stories, which take you around the region from gym to gym with story beats along the way, everything in Scarlet and Violet was completely static, and was just waiting for you to arrive and do the battles. Every gym, every Titan, every team starbase is just on the map, and all of the story happens at those locations. I've already talked about my opinions of this in Scarlet and Violet's review, but I think it's fair to say that this works in some respects as it allows a non-linear approach, but it did lead to the game feeling quite empty outside of these areas. There are no memorable moments from the story until the climax of the game, which takes a more traditional approach. I spoke about how I would do a non-linear story back in the open world discussion video, and I stand by all of that. ZA took the approach of having a linear story in a non-linear world, which I'm very glad they did. That's what I was hoping for, and I think it was a real strength, as it really utilised the world to its advantage, having you go all over Lumiose at different points in the story. I think using that approach would probably be the best way forward for the main story, though I think that gyms should probably still be non-linear, so having them separate from the main story or related to certain events that don't need to happen in a set order, or just having it tied to badge numbers rather than specific badges would be a great compromise. I do want there to be more plot-driven story in this game, like the Legends titles and previous Pokémon games, rather than the far more character-based approach that Scarlet and Violet took. It is really great in some ways, and I think that the ideal situation would be to kind of blend the two, but I didn't feel really any stakes in Scarlet and Violet until the ending, and even then, there's not really any real pressure until you reach the Zero Lab. Oh, and the story should also actually be present throughout the game, and, not feel slapped on at the end. Sword and Shield really failed in that regard, and with the entire focus being on the gym challenge, which I think is possibly why I want them to be separate going forward. For the climax of the story, I really hope that they can make it as exciting and interesting as Scarlet and Violet's, as fulfilling and intense as ZA's. The journey into Area Zero was so interesting and honestly quite scary because of all the unknown elements. You have no idea what's waiting for you down there, and the fight against Angie was amazing and really felt like a culmination of everything that ZA was going for. But what about afterwards? Scarlet and Violet had a short post-game that saw you go around to each of the gyms and rematch the leaders. Sword and Shield had a post-game story which introduced 2 new antagonists and saw you go around to each of the gyms and to take on Dynamax Pokemon. Sun and Moon had the Ultra Beast quests, which you take on with Luca and Annabelle. The Ultra Games had episode RR, which was the Team Rainbow Rocket storyline. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire had the Delta episode, and X and Y had the Looker missions in Lumiose City. Arceus and ZA both had very meaty post-games, with Arceus taking you around Hisui to collect the Arceus plates, and then had the final showdown with Volo, and in ZA you have new quests to capture Xerneas and Yveltal, battle L, capture Zygarde, and take on 20 rounds of the Infinite ZA Royale in order to get Eternal Flower Floette. Of course, I am hoping for a post-game in Gen 10, and I want it to be closer to the levels of ZA, Arceus, Oras, and the Ultra Games in length. I recognise that that's pretty unlikely, as we'll most likely see a situation with Scarlet and Violet, where the mysteries in the base game aren't fully solved until the DLC, but I think that there's a fair chance that we could see a bigger post-game than Scarlet and Violet. I'm hoping that the game will at least give us something akin to the Looker missions of the past, which help to kind of conclude parts of the main story. As for the sound design, I'm pretty hopeful with this. ZA's soundtrack is phenomenal from start to finish, between the unique themes from the different characters to the Rogue Mecha Battle theme, and everything in between. I can only hope that Gen 10's soundtrack is as good as that. I unfortunately found myself a bit disappointed by the Scarlet and Violet soundtrack, with the overworld themes being really disappointing. The Gym Leader theme kind of felt like there was just something missing, the wild Pokemon not even getting their own theme outside of Pokepath and the Great Crater. It just wasn't as good as I was hoping for. There was still a lot of good tracks in there, like Gita's battle theme, the Elite Four battle theme, and the final Nemona fight theme, as well as all of the Area Zero related themes. And the DLC's tracks were all very good, so I'm definitely hopeful for Gen 10 in that regard. I want them to kind of use what they learned from composing the ZA soundtrack in this game, as that music has been universally praised by many, especially Jacinth's battle theme. I also really don't want them to bring back dynamic music for the most part. That might sound really backwards, but in Scarlet and Violet it really kind of wrecked a lot of the experience for me. As if you weren't riding Miraidon throughout the entire game, you didn't get unique themes for areas, and even then, those themes were just variations on 4 different motifs, nothing like the unique variety of music that we expect from the series. I know Lumiose technically did the same, but I'm more willing to forgive that as it was just one city rather than an entire region, and I think that the theme is just better, so didn't get as annoying as quickly. Also, please just let wild Pokemon have their own battle themes. It does not just need to be yet another variation of the same 4 themes that take up the entire overworld. Literally only Cascarrafa, Mesagoza, Cabopoko and Levincia get unique city themes in those games. The rest is all just variations on the province's theme. I'd much rather they bring back unique area music for this title. Now for the UI design. I really hope that it goes back to having more personality than it did in Scarlet and Violet. The UI there is dull and frankly a little ugly. I really didn't enjoy it and found it to be very boring and basic. ZA's UI is better, having it be more stylized to fit with the game, but not quite enough. It's still quite minimalistic. Legends Arceus did this really, it kind of felt like it fit with the game quite nicely, but I don't think any of the Switch games compared to the Alola UI, which is just perfect in my opinion. The Pokemon Battle screen from Sun and Moon is a really fitting piece, which works very nicely, and the text boxes from Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon really reflect the more vibrant and tropical feel of those titles. I'm hoping that the UI design sensibilities from those games will come back here, as I think that the minimalistic design has been played out and just kind of makes the menus very boring to navigate. Okay, I think it's fair to say that it's time for me to draw up my thoughts and conclusions for the day. It has been a real challenge making this video. I have been dodging leaks like the plague, not just for this game, but for ones leaked that are even later down the line. It is really tiresome, and I think it's such a shame that this has happened, but I'm going to do a whole video on that soon, so stay tuned. Gen 10 is right around the corner. The reveal is most likely in less than a month, and then I'll be able to start making more concrete predictions, thoughts, and theories. It does feel a bit odd going straight back to the Pokemon hype cycle when ZA only feels like it was released yesterday, but that is the nature of this series, unlike any other game series that I've been involved with. I think it's safe to say that I have high hopes for Gen 10, and a lot of it really hinges on the battle system. We might not find out what the battle system will be until June or July, which no doubt will absolutely kill me internally, but either way, I am looking forward to this game a lot. It has a lot of potential, and I really don't know what to expect on anything more than a fundamental level. To be clear, I don't even think that everything I've spoken about in this video is going to happen. I'd be happy if even half of it happened, to be honest, but you know, I'm always a bit of a dreamer with this sort of thing. But I also know that these things are possible with the right amount of time, effort, and research. I'm a game designer myself, and I think that it's more than fair to say that all of this is all possible. But with that, I think I've said just about everything I can on Gen 10 for now. I think it's quite funny that I've managed to make a video this long on a game we know literally nothing about. Well, I mean, some people know more about it, but, you know, I am not one of them, and I do not want to be one of them. But hey, that's what I'm here for. With all of that being said, bye for now.